Alrighty, well, it is officially 4 p.m. Eastern Time, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today for Be an Accessibility Anti-Hero by Ms. Donna Bungard. I hope you're all enjoying Drupal Camp Asheville Online Edition so far. A couple of comments, just if you have any questions as we go through the session, feel free to put those in the chat. I'm going to be compiling a list of them. And then at the end of the session, after Donna's done, we'll go ahead and ask those questions so she can answer them. If we don't get to anything, feel free to still have them in the chat and we can touch base on the Drupal Camp Asheville Slack and we'll get those answered for you. So as a client lead at Canopy, Donna focuses her digital career on all things human to help teams, clients, and users stay connected as they grow together. With a passion for storytelling that goes beyond an understanding of the hero archetype, she leans into how the human makes a difference. This love has driven her to specialize in content strategy and, as we'll learn about here, accessibility. So with that, Donna will present Be an Accessibility Anti-Hero, the strategic-driven story of how website accessibility isn't charity. You all set, Donna?
Sounds good to me.
All right, handing it over to you.
Awesome. Well, apparently my dogs are really excited too. Forgive me. If my face is too big, just double click over on the slide deck, make it bigger, follow along. Quick disclaimer down below. I am turned on Google's auto captions. Hopefully it'll do a pretty good job, but you never know. So bear with me. And if it gets really weird, it's not my fault. So with that, being an accessibility anti-hero. Before we even get into the meat of it, I want to start with assuming positive intent. I talk about this later, but I'm going to preach it a little bit now. I am assuming positive intent. I am assuming every one of you wants to be a hero, wants to do great things, good people. You want to include everybody, make sure everyone can access your content, wants to do all the wonderful things in the world, and you're just trying to figure out how to juggle it in with all those other competing priorities. Those multiple stakeholders, those multiple user types, all of these things playing together with your time, your budget, and I don't know, a whole lot of weird stuff going on in the universe right at the moment. But you're good people and you want to do good. So what we're going to be talking about today is how to make that a little bit easier for you so you can justify that budget and you can really just grow with it. So before we get started, who am I to even talk about this? I am Donna Bungard. As Kelly mentioned, I am a client lead over here at Canopy Studios. I tend to do a lot of like learning and studying. So I have alphabet soup after my name, but it basically means when it comes to accessibility and content, I'm pretty darn good, or at least pretty darn studied. So here we go. Also, I kind of take a different approach or look at accessibility than other people because growing up, I was the only one in my immediate family without a disability. So I tend to be really pragmatic because accessibility was never we should do this for the user kind of thing for me. It was, oh my gosh, am I going to have to carry all the groceries up by myself again because my sister can't hear me? Oh, no. I'm going to make sure she is perfectly able to know what's going on here. I'm really practical about it. So I want to just expand that practical thoughts processes to you. And like I do to our clients over here at Canopy. We are a fantastic organization and I really am excited because so many of my clients are these wonderful mission-driven organizations. And because of that, not only are we building awesome stuff together, but they're taking that and really doing some good in the universe. And that just makes me so happy and so proud. And yeah, I love my team. I love my crew. And yeah, you can read all that stuff too. But today we're here to talk about accessibility and the fact that compliance or conformance, depending upon your perspective of it, it's not an option anymore. It's something we need. It's something we need from a lot of different points of view, whether it be a ROI-driven point of view, again, practical website best practices point of view, or a legal point of view. These things need to happen now. So to talk about that really in depth. We're going to just touch on first heroes versus anti-heroes. Now, I know we got to learn a lot about accessibility on Carrie's awesome talk earlier, but we're going to do a quick recap of a couple things from my perspective. We're going to go over how accessibility is not charity and how it makes sense. But we're going to go over how to start with it, how that is in our universe right now, and where we go from there. So with that, okay, Comic Books 101, Hero. You're great. There's an awesome book out there. It's a philosophy of comics. And they talk about how archetypes of the hero, like Superman, are right up there with the Plato-Socrates form of a hero, the form of that good, of doing good for good's sake, and all of these wonderful things. And that's great. That's awesome. But then there's the anti-hero. And they're usually a little bit more human. They're a little bit more flawed. And they kind of have their own needs and selfishness kind of mixed in there. And they don't feel bad about it so much as it's just kind of who they are. And they still need to get their stuff done, but they want to do good. And they're happy to do good. And they're great people. They just kind of have slightly different motivators. So what I'm suggesting here is that you're the anti-hero. But of who, right? You don't need to be the anti-hero of people with disabilities. They're not looking for you to be their hero. You need to respect them. And we as organizations who are trying to present accessible media, accessible websites, accessible content for them to consume and to interact with, this demographic needs your respect. No, you're not being the hero, the anti-hero for this group. They're the heroes of their own story. Any content strategist, however they articulate it, and there's a lot of ways to articulate it, but I always say that at the end, your user is the hero of their own story on your website. Now that story can be something as fantastical as this grand purchase, or it can be something smaller of, oh, I really wanted to buy this, this little necklace, so I just did, and then I went on with life. It doesn't have to be a great story, but the hero of the story is your user. It's not you. So why be the anti-hero if I'm already saying that they don't need your saving? Because your organizations need you. Organizations have a bottom line, and you're going to learn exactly how important accessibility is to that ROI. You need to promote it inside your organization because of all of those practical reasons and because it's a good thing. You get to hit two birds with one stone. Oh, I hate that analogy, but you know what I mean. And you'll be able to showcase this and have metrics and understand how this is going to work. So again, the quick recap. Accessibility, as we're discussing it today, is talking about breaking down the barriers of people who may not be able to perceive, operate, understand, or use the robust functionality of your site. And if you take a look at that statistic, that's a quarter of Americans and nearly a quarter of Canadian adults self-identify as being disabled. And keep in mind, those are also only adults and only those who self-identify. We work with a lot of higher ed. And when kids are starting to look at colleges and stuff, they don't wait till they're legal adults who can answer those questions. There is a huge number of people who need the barriers removed. And those barriers, as we discussed a little bit earlier, come in four forms usually: cognitive, visual, audio, and mobile, or ambulatory. And these things, these challenges are not strictly to those who self-identify. Yes, spectrum disorders, low vision or color blindness, hearing loss, ALS. These are all really important physical ailments. They are permanent. But you know what? So is being so distracted. I don't know about anybody else, but even though I'm working from home for the last many years, it's a lot more crowded these last several months. I assure you, it's been a little distracting from time to time. So with that, visual, you have a glare on your screen. How many of us have maybe cracked a few of these over the years? audio, it's loud, you're distracted, or maybe you're just sitting there trying to carry everything with you with, don't forget, the enormous coffee, and you need to have your hands free. So if you consider that, and then if you think about globally, because we work in a global medium, 1 in 7 people are impacted. So whether or not your site, your online experience is accessible, you're talking between 15 and 25% of your potential market. Nobody wants to alienate that much. So Web Content Accessibility Guidelines by W3C 2.0 was kind of the original of these more advanced ones. Technically, there were ones before them, but they're a little bit harder to define. 2.1 had added the all the same goodness plus 17 more things to kind of take care of more modern technologies such as screen rotation and all that good stuff. You have 3 levels. It's small, medium, large. Everyone wants to go with the medium. It hits the widest thing, or at least medium, the AA. AAA is beautiful, is wonderful. Don't ever think you can't have a gorgeous, visually gorgeous or intriguing AAA site, but it does take a little bit more work. So there you go. Okay, recap over. Let's move forward. I keep saying it, accessibility is in charity. You're not saving them. Because you see in UK, the music industry loses $2.5 million, pounds in ticket sales per year. US consumers with vision loss have estimated $175 billion of disposable income. So I kind of did the math here. I saw that about 2% of total e-commerce transactions completed by those who are blind. So that's about $3.5 billion if we just do the 2% of the 175 here. $3.5 billion. That's notable. That is something to be considered. E-commerce is losing 50 billion pounds. That was way harder than it needs to be. 50 billion pounds a year because they're not accessible. And we're talking about an overall budget, shall we say, or potential impact of nearly $8 trillion a year. The people with disabilities are an active part of our lives, of our digital experience, of our digital user group, and they're wanting to engage with us. And we're making it hard. We're sometimes making it impossible for them to engage, to function online. They're powerful, powerful user groups. They are a powerful subsegment of your demographics, of your personas already. It's time to start treating this large, empowered group as active members. So it makes sense. As I said, but it makes sense to make sure we're keeping that in mind. Now we know your budget matters. I get it. You have a marketing budget. You're either you are the CMO or you're answering to your CMO, or maybe your stakeholder answers to the CMO. You only have finite numbers. So what we want to do and what the movement has to be is it has to stop being accessibility. It has to be more like me wanting my sister to carry the groceries up the stairs with me. It has to be just baked into the process of, oh no, we're not going down there. We're going to fix it because this is just how it works. This is just what we do. So think about it. If 2/3 on average, 2/3 of blind individuals or people who are blind abandon e-commerce transactions, that's costing your client or yourselves money. Your site or your organization is losing money by increased call center calls. because their sites are not visually accessible. And again, these two both just focus on the visual. And then fewer sites have, less than 1 in 3, had clear ways of communicating back to the problem site that they're even having an issue. Now, from a strictly logistics standpoint, if a user is really frustrated trying to interact with your site and engage, and you make it so they can't even complain to you, who are they going to complain to? It's a problem. It's serious. It's real. So let's talk about some of the ways it impacts your site itself, because I'm talking about all these other things. Let's go right down to search engines. Search engines, Google, are making up about 93% of all website traffic. That's almost everything. But if you look at it and you think about it and you just perceive this, search engines don't see your pictures or your pretty layouts. They don't hear your awesome video content, but they are paying attention and they're learning, and they are learning fast. So search engine robots and spiders and all these wonderful things that crawl our site and index our sites are looking at what our alt texts say about our images. They're looking for video captions and transcripts to be able to understand the value of that medium. They are looking for meaningful content that is going to drive users and answer their questions and meet their needs, because frankly, a search engine isn't going to want anything a user doesn't want, because they're servicing their end user. They need those keywords and phrases to be real. They need them to be words and phrases people use and think when they're talking about your subject matter. So the 411, just a quick intro here. Frankly, I know at DrupalCon will be a great session by Jim Birch to diving in a little bit more about all of this. But the 411 here is have your alt text. Make sure it's meaningful. Make sure it's relevant to your content. It carries some wonderful examples about the snail. I always say, make sure that whatever your description is meaningful to the page. Does it matter that I am sitting in a chair? No. Does it matter she was sitting in front of a video call having a presentation? Yes. And keep them short and sweet and simple, the alt text. Don't write a novel. Screen readers, after a while, they only read so many characters in a row before they kind of take a breath. So after a while, if you keep going on and on and on, it starts sounding like William Shatner on the deck of the Enterprise. And it just does that weird breaking thing. Just don't do it. Nobody wants to hear it. Too much detail. Make sure your links are descriptive. Click here to learn more. Doesn't do anything. Click here to find out about this really cool, huge flower my son picked out of the garden and asked me to wear today. That tells you a little more. Get that captioning and those transcripts. Make sure your heading structure makes sense. Headers have value and weight for search engines to say, how important are these words? Make sure that you're using them in an effective manner. Oh, and make sure your page titles are unique. I kind of switched my reading order. Make sure your page titles are unique. To have all your page titles, your HTML ones, the one at the top say the same thing is like going to a New York subway and having them all say, New York City. Next stop, New York City. Next stop, New York City. I don't know about any of you. Maybe you would understand where you were, but I would be hopelessly lost on that subway forever. And then reading level. As we covered earlier, make sure it's about 9th grade, even a little bit lower. I once worked with an urgent care site, and they started aiming for 9th grade. I'm like, no, if you're talking to somebody who's all stressed out because their child just got whacked in the head or something, they are not going to be reading at the 9th grade reading level. Make it even easier. Think about your audience, why they're there on your site, what their interactions are going to look like, and keep that at front of mind. And then, of course, there's legal. And this has gotten a lot of information over the last year. ADA, Section 508. You need, for basically US, you need to at least be WCAG 2.0 AA compliant or conformant, depending again on your perspective. If you're in Canada, they put out their bill after 2.1 was released, so they are 2.1 AA compliant or conformant. Really interesting fact is nearly a quarter of all the litigation and the settlements in this millennia have happened in the last 3 years, maybe 3.5 since I found that statistic. And it came from, a lot of it came from the Winn-Dixie case, because once a website was deemed as by the court as a portal to a brick and mortar location, well, then suddenly that really opened the floodgates. So when Domino's tried to push back a little bit, well, they didn't exactly win. Yeah, so between 2017 and 2018, we had a 177% increase in lawsuits. Most of them being, well, I shouldn't say the most, but the vast majority being between New York and Florida. So, all right, you get it. Again, assuming positive intent, you get it. It's important. It makes sense. It's all these great things. Woohoo, go team. Where do you start? Well, you start by building it into your strategy. And I'm not saying make accessibility a line item in your strategy. One second. All that talking. I'm saying build it into the strategy you're already doing. That whole measure twice, cut once with any strategic discovery, you can build this accessibility into that. You build it into the strategy, because think about it. Well, one statistic said by now, 50% of online searches would be by voice. I need to fact check that, but even if we're not quite there yet, we're headed there. 100 million hours of video content on Facebook daily, and that's only Facebook. 51% of B2B marketers prioritize the visual, which is cutting out a big percentage of their market by not, thinking a little bit broader. And then this is a statistic that gets me. 1.5 billion people. The aging population is predicted to triple to 1.5 billion by 2050. Dude, I'm one of those 1.5 billion people. Oh my gosh, I set off the dog. But I'm one of those 1.5 billion people who are going to be really old by then. Are you? Do you want to still be able to access the web? Oh my gosh, we need to build this in. Be an anti-hero. Build it in for you. She's very passionate about this too. So anyway, building it into your branding and thinking about it that way. Are your brand colors accessible? Now, it's great if you have an accent color that maybe isn't really great with the contrast. You use it as an accent, and that's lovely and that's wonderful. But are the colors you're using every day accessible? Are the words you're using in plain enough language that your users are actually going to be thinking about those words? I mean, don't use a lot of jargon or acronyms. I mean, we're in an industry of acronyms, and I love my acronyms. But on the other hand, you have to spell them out at some point. You have to just make sure you're being very inclusive to those who might not be familiar with that. And any branding and any strategist anywhere is going to tell you to be consistent. Well, if you're working with content that isn't consistent, that might be even more confusing for someone who is relying on assistive technologies to help them out. And then there's representation. I put a lot on representation. I noticed this. It's actually one of the things I tell people a lot is to remember the human, remember the people. And it's not just me. Really big names have been doing this for years. It's not all, the perfect Hollywood starlet look anymore. Real people and all their beautiful idiosyncrasies or differences or changes or uniqueness, real people and all their beautiful humanness. It matters. if you want people to relate to you, to bond with you as an organization, to build loyalty and continue to come back to you, they need to see themselves as the ones you're talking to. And that can go through visuals. This can go through terminologies. This can even be the way you use your contact forms. If you don't let special characters in your contact forms, you realize how many people you're basically invalidating their very name. Representation matters. So start with your personas. Think about, again, who your users are. Most of you probably already have personas. I hope so. This is the easiest way to build a content strategy or any strategy to really reach these users. So think about that in terms of data. Cornell University put out this really cool tool that helps you see what individual has, what group of individuals are likely to have an ambulatory, cognitive, all these different types, one of those 4 types of issues, or concerns or challenges, not really issues, I'm sorry, I apologize, that was a bad word. Experience different challenges. So what you can do, and sometimes these age gaps are a little bit big, but it still gives you a general idea of how people are challenged, or again, that what they're doing and how they might experience life. So in my little sample thing, I didn't sit around and add a bullet point for, are they disabled? Yes or no? This individual, Howard, happens to be married to a high school music teacher, happens to like guitar and wheelchair tennis. All you need to do. But a mobility issue was built into that persona based on data. Given by his age and the CDC statistics of all humans, or at least US humans, around 60, 65, guess what? All of our vision starts going wonky, or at least the majority of us, the vast majority. Like the older we get, sorry, you're all temporarily abled. If you didn't know that, I'm sorry to tell you that, you are. So I could easily have made this one that was vision related. And with that, maybe I would have put, under hobbies, listening to descriptive audiobooks or something along those lines. There are ways to make the human more human in your personas, and humans are temporarily abled. So with those humans, we get a test. We got a test to make sure we know what we're talking about. So look at your wireframes. If you're going through a whole design process, look at your wireframes. There used to be a module that I happen to remember was out of the box. It was a mega menu one. It wasn't accessible for keyboards or screen readers out of the box. So when we were looking at being a PM, I'd be like, okay, let's add X many hours when we're building that to account for the fact that we're going to have to make a keyboard accessible. No big deal. It was just baked into the process. This wasn't a accessibility add-on. This was just making sure it was done right. When you have a designer, take a look at either create a design or maybe look at one that was submitted. Make sure that the color contrast is going to work. Make sure when you're looking at Zoom and mobile and all of these things that the buttons don't get so close to each other that you end up having a keyboard trap. And then test as you go. Keep testing so you can be prepared for what you can't perceive yourself. I mean, you can't perceive everything. And then whenever possible, test with native users. These are individuals who use these tools, this assistive technology every day. And they're going to be able to perceive issues that you don't. The only thing I need to suggest, or 2 important things with this, is moderate it. Because if you are using asking a user who is unable to see to use a screen reader, if that screen reader misses your entire call to action, they're not going to know they missed it. But if you're moderating it, the moderator will. And the second thing is, remember about this whole thing about accessibility isn't charity? Neither is user testing. If you're asking native users to use it, you're your captions are relevant. I'm really hoping that these ones are. I'm not reading as it speaks. Stay focused and keep your users on that customer decision journey. Keep them moving through the process. And make sure you always leave room for a next step. Empower your users. You never want them to get to the bottom of the page and say, well, I guess I leave now. I'm not saying everything is a macro conversion. That's like sending somebody too many martinis at a bar. Don't do it. Okay, nobody wants that. But what it does mean is that maybe it's, hey, you like this? Read more about that. Maybe give them the opportunity to share. Empower your users, regardless of what technologies, whether they be assistive or not, the ability to take that next step. When you're working with your team and you're working internally, train for empathy. You don't need to be a grand accessibility expert to keep an eye on your site to make sure that it's at least hitting low bar marks. Do content editor training. Teach people what to look for. Teach them how to empathize. You're probably not going to catch everything, but at least you're setting a bar and you're making that effort and you're fostering meaningful actions and produce those measurable results. And again, we're not talking about charity. Those measurable results are a quarter of people who you might not have been able to proceed your site or work on your site or convert on your site are now able to convert. And then there's this kind of little pesky detail about the universe being kind of flipped over on its head right now. Beforehand, 7% of us worked remotely, in the US at least, and then 10% of European users. Right now, that 7% has inflated to 62% of people are working remotely, relying on digital media, relying on web and web technologies more and more. And of that 62, 59% of them want to stay that way. And I can't exactly blame them. I love working remotely. But 59% of that 62 want to stay working remotely, which means they are going to need your working environments, your digital environments, your digital sites, and the tools that you kind of took for granted in the office. It's whether or not they're accessible isn't a checkbox. It isn't a HR thing. It's not one of those little details. This is how we're living now. This is now. It's like that Spaceballs moment. This is now. You need to make sure everything's accessible internally. So how do you do that? Again, whenever you're just having a meeting, throw in the captions. Hangouts, Zoom, Teams, I believe, yeah, Teams does. They all have those options. Again, limit those idioms and acronyms unless people know what you're talking about. Try to be descriptive. We're talking about being descriptive to end users, but sometimes we kind of take it for granted when it's our coworkers, right? Because you're just used to being there and talking to them. Be descriptive. You have to make a little bit more of an effort right now for all of us. And then be accommodating. Everyone is relearning. Even those of us who have worked from home are dealing with different circumstances, or most of us at least. People are relearning how to work and how to be accessible in their everyday lives in this digital environment. So we need to have very strong communication, and it comes back to what I started with, assuming positive intent. I want to just say that one again, because we're all trying. We're all working really hard to make everything work for each other. And if maybe you don't know that coworker has always had a little bit of a hard of hearing thing. You just kind of always thought they stood with one ear more towards you, or maybe you didn't even notice that. Maybe they're having a challenge seeing it. Maybe they're having a harder time reading your lips because they needed to see everybody on the Zoom call and everybody's this big. All of these options are out there where you might not have noticed that somebody had a challenge with the way you were talking to them before because they were just self-compensating. And maybe that individual can't. Communicate. And if you're the one having the problem, realize that you need to communicate too. If you're not that you're having a problem, but you're having a hard time perceiving them. Assume that they're trying to and communicate. So where do we go from here? What are our next steps? Let's be practical. The next step is realizing that this is a process that doesn't end, not on the web. And if this many people stay working remotely, maybe not in our work lives either. It's constant. It's a constant cycle. Analyze what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, where can we improve? Create a strategy to make those improvements. Define the user experience that needs to happen. Develop any tools, and then educate your team on how to make it work. And then analyze if it's working and go through it again. It's a life cycle. It's not a one and done. It's never been like that. It never will be. Technologies are evolving. We're evolving. And with that, any questions? All right, I'll look through chat.
I guess I have to get my video turned back on. I did not see any questions come through the chat. So we should be good there. Anybody last minute questions going once, going twice? Alrighty, well, I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to my own screen share so we can just post the upcoming items. And thank you, Donna, so much for that wonderful presentation.